thank you for doing this. Obviously, I've known who you are for a long, long time. But one thing I don't know about you is you start off as kind of like a bassist sideman. Then at a certain point, you kind of became this producer slash packager slash band leader slash hard to define kind of guy. How do you like to be thought of or categorized?
Well, actually, I think when you met me, I was bass player, but I always worked as a producer. I mean, actually, bass player, it's, playing bass is my instrument, it's like my main thing. But since I started playing when I was I was still living in Italy, like during my high school, I would say it's never been like a rock, Italy, it's never really been like a rock and roll country. As far as like a general culture, I'm not saying that there is not. There's plenty of rock fans and all of it, but you don't grow up. It's not like being born in Los Angeles or in Memphis. It's just a completely different different setting. And when you start to go to recording studio to track your first demos or whatever it is, I always brought like records, vinyls or cassettes, to kind of like steer the house engineer to get close to what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Never really worked. They couldn't go any further away than what we're asking. So I had to kind of like learn how to take things in my own hands, start to kind of like, orthodoxly or unorthodox, in an unorthodox way, to kind of like try to get, things working on my end. So I always got that side. When I moved to New York in 1990, at the end of the 90s, I joined a band, and with a guitar player, we kind of like transformed the house band. I mean, where the rest of the guys were living, I was living in the city, and we had a small recording studio where we would track our stuff. But we also started to recording local bands, out in the island or in the city, and Connecticut and all of that. Yeah. And that's where really kind of like got me really involved into that. And then obviously started to record other guys like in the bigger studios in the city. And when I came to LA in 96, I was, I ended up in landing, a gig with Nina Hagen. I was her musical director, and the same time where I was recording with Steve Vai. And because of that, my following trip to Italy, I was just there for like a couple of weeks to visit my parents and to take care of some stuff. I ended up going to record with an upcoming artist from Warner. They were doing some pre-productions and stuff, and the artist actually happened to be a very good friend of my cousin. That's why she called me, hey, since you're in town, why don't you come down? I didn't really want to do it. It was just a couple of days. I haven't seen my cousin in years. He says, okay, let's do it. I don't know what they were doing, but they didn't have their, can I say shit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so
they didn't have not everyone can, but you can.
they didn't have their shit together. Yeah. And after 2 days, I'm productive 2 days. I was like, you know what? I'm sorry, guys, but I came here to visit my friend, my parents. I have to take care of a bunch, so I cannot stay here. And one of the guys that was there, like an older dude and everything, that I didn't really know the hell it was. Maybe I thought it was somebody from the studio or like a friend to the artist. And he says, but why don't you, but you keep telling these guys, about this and that. Why would you like, why don't you do something? What do you think? And I said, what I think, it's like that you need to kind of like really start to record music and play stuff and just keep on talking. I mean, we're in the recording studio and you're doing something that you should have done at home. And he says, like, what you have in mind? Well, can you give me like 4 or 5 hours with all these guys? So within 5 hours, we ended up in recording, I'm not kidding, like 4 or 5 tracks that we already had around, I mean, in terms of like the chords and all of it, but nobody was like really trying, very, very primordial demos, yeah. Right? And actually they were kicking. So at the end of those, I ended up in, say, cool, thank you, guys, now I really need to leave. I hope that you can work. And I went to the artist, Laura, I thought that, I really hope that this can help you, blah, 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 and everything. And the same guy, when I was leaving, it comes behind me and it's like, I know what you do in the States and all of that. And I think it would be a good idea if you produce the record. And he gave me his business card. And actually that was the Warner A&R that was about to sign the artist that we just worked with. So sure. We kept in touch and I ended up in getting my first production deal with Warner. I work with that artist and a bunch of other artists too, a lot of other Italians and European artists coming to record in the States, and for the Latin market, I started to do also executive production. So those things always went back to back with me, and that's why even nowadays, that you see me with my two bands, with Supersonic Blues Machine and also with Soul Garage Experience, it kind of like, it's very difficult for me to kind of like call myself out of one position and go into the next, because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I'm trying to impose on people. It's just, it comes with a package. Like, got somebody like a Gary Moore or Peter Frampton, they come with a guitar playing and the singing. You don't separate the two things. Sure, you can, but it comes natural when they pick up their instrument and they do that. For me, it's always like, I always have something to say about whether it's the production, the organizations, and all that kind of stuff. So, and throughout the years, I wear so many hats, not only in the productions in the studio, but also live and putting together, special things like weird nights with Steve Vai. We ended up out of a concept from one night dinner that we had at the house, because with Steve was like family, it's the guy that gave me my opportunity, but we ended up becoming very good friends. We were like family type. We launched this thing about this idea of the orchestra, and I ended up in producing a tour for him in Europe with a whole state, Romanian state orchestra. And we traveled from all the way Russia to Spain, recording the whole thing, ended up becoming a DVD and stuff. So I'm always just trying to do more than just bass playing. And I'm not trying to diminish the importance of bass playing. I'm just saying that for me, since I never really, I'm not one of those guys like super virtuoso or anything like that. They spend 12 hours a day practicing and then become Jacko. For me, the bass playing, I think it took on kind of like in life, the same type of position than the bass player as in music, or at least in a rock or blues or rhythm and blues band, meaning it keeps everything together and it gets things moving. And generally, the bass player in the band is the one that runs the business or management until the band gets the management, is the one that never fights, is the one that always breaks up the fight between the guitar player and the singer. And it kind of like, I get that thing, it's just, I don't know, it came with a package. So when this is like what you do, well, I'm a musician, I produce and I write. But what do you produce? Or everything, records, movies, live, dinners, whatever you need. You need windows, floors, whatever you need, I'll make it happen.
Well, something you were just saying about the importance of the bass player, my really generalizing theory here is that in every rock band, the bass player is either the most important person behind the band or the least important. It's like Iron Maiden, that is Steve Harris's band.
Of course,
Kiss, arguably Gene Simmons' band. Motley Crue, that is.
I might, since I'm close to the Stalic camp, I might argue with you with that. But of course, without Gene, Gene is at least a good 50 something percent, and the other 50 being Paul. So, I give it to you. I know what you're saying. So
but you have that, and then you have lots of bands where it's like the bass player changes every album, bass player doesn't write anything, they just memorize the parts and they're gone. But in your case, now you're saying I'm not a virtuoso per se, but I really admire how you're able to do a gig like Steve Vai, then you're able to do something like Starbreaker, which is a harder rock project. You're able to work with Chad Smith and various projects of his, so you can straddle the lines between funk and hard rock. You've got the Soul Garage Experience, which is obviously a soul-oriented thing. So you have always been this utility player that goes, what do you guys need? I can do that. You're somehow the easy guy that brings everyone together. So what I'm getting at is, were you always that nice? Were you always the easy person to work with? Or is that like when you became an adult that happened?
No, you know what? I've never been a troublemaker. Never in my life. The only trouble that I make is, I guess, verbally or being actively involved when it comes down to civil things, political things, or like, a right cause and that kind of stuff. But to be honest with you, I never been that guy. Never. Even when I was a little kid, my parents, now they're both gone, but they always told me, says, you were always very quiet. You always play with your Legos and stuff like that and listen to the records in your room. You never bother anybody. Sometimes kids could be like a really high maintenance, and no, and never been like that for me. So I don't know, to be honest with you, I think one of the biggest joy or compensations, if you want to call it, in life is like when you get to play and when you get to play with people. So for me, when I started playing with my friends, I mean, we weren't even thinking about gigs already, because I could go to a rehearsal and hang with my friends, not just playing soccer or whatever, but playing. That for me was already Christmas, you know? So, you know, of course, you know, times goes by and, you know, your, what do you call it? Not requirements, but what you like, what you want to see and all of that might change, might improve, might decrease. It depends. But for me, I always been, you know, we're here, we play, you know, really, what's the problem? You know, never, I really don't see that issue. I really don't see the issue. You know what? There was something that Billy Gibbons always say before, you know, whenever he gets to play with us with Supersonic, and it's something that always stuck to my mind, because that's another guy that really changed a lot of things for me in terms of like being a mentor. No, technically, me make that call or whatever. And he's guys, you know, when we're doing our little pre-show gathering, cheering, you know, the kind of like football, you know, 5 minutes concentration. Yeah. And he's like, guys, actually, I'm gonna give you my Gibbons. Like, guys, remember, we don't have to do this. We get to do this.
You get to do this, yeah.
So just thinking of that and thinking the fact that I make a living with my passion, why do I have to be sour about it? At least with the people around me in the band. Then, of course, we're talking about the business, record companies and all of that. I mean, then we can write books about it. But when it comes down to because I have musicians that I'm sure that you interview, they will tell you the same things. It's like, music, it's always the easiest part for our musicians. That's always the thing that comes down and come up easy. I mean, with no problem, no struggles, is everything else around it that generally screws it up, makes it more complicated or unpleasant. So there's already a lot of unpleasantry outside the actual band nucleus or the recording band nucleus. So I try always to kind of like, crack a joke or be, fine, just to create a very harmonious environment. The music benefits from that big time.
Well, one of the things you said at the beginning was about how you kind of had to leave Italy to pursue rock, or in general, make a living, because Italy's not the country for it. And that's something I've heard when I've interviewed Christina and other members of Lacuna Coil.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, yeah, our business is in North America and the rest of Europe. But an interesting thing to me about that is any artist who was hard rock, who sold a lot of records in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, what record company are they on? Frontiers Records in Italy. So...
No, but see, the thing is this, Frontiers, I mean, actually, and lots of kudos to them, because they gave work and they rediscover a lot of artists that otherwise it would have been forgotten. So, the utmost respect to those guys, which actually, as per today, we're still very, very good friends, and occasionally we do some work together. But that was something that happened I left Italy in 1990, at the end of 1990. From 1991 was actually when there was like a music revolution in Italy, and all those bands like Lacuna Coil, and they're all from my own town, from Milan, right? But then also bands like Labyrinth, Rhapsodies, and all that kind of like a super, what do they call it? Not melodic, how they call it? Power metal. I mean, I'm not into that whatsoever. I mean, I respect it, but it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And even clubs and everything were like really blooming. And I remember that I was already living in the States. Like, for example, when I was telling you about the recording that I did, right after my Steve Vai experience, clubs and everything was playing and people were playing every night. So it's like, what the hell? You guys were waiting for me to leave before I get this whole thing going on. But, it's just, there's also the mentality. I mean, I'm, of course, a few years older than a lot of these cats. And my time was not my country's time, And again, it's not that I couldn't be a musician over there, because actually I was doing quite well. Even though I was young, I was working with a lot of people. We had like weekly gigs, like with top 40 bands. I was doing recording sessions in studio during the week. I had, I was working with other Italian artists. So it's not that was, that I was like into something else and music was just an hobby. It's just that it was not what I wanted to do. And I'm like, you know what, if I don't take a chance now, When am I going to take it? When I'm even more established in these things that I already do not like. So, that's why I had to make the move. And, believe it or not, I'm in touch with a lot of friends of mine from my own country. Some of them live abroad. Some of them are still living there. And some of them are incredible musicians. And right now, especially for the metal side, I look in Italy as almost like a main reference, because there's so many musicians and bands and things that are happening from there that I'm like, wow. But that's never really been my world. I'm not turning metal down, okay? Don't get me wrong. I've always been a rock guy, but I always had this funk soul side of me from when I was very little, because that's the music that I could hear on the radio. It was either Elvis, Earth, Wind and Fire, Tina Turner, all that stuff, because they were not playing rock and roll, or Italian music from the 60s and the 50s, which I really love. And now that I'm older and I'm working more into even music for movies and all of that, I get to appreciate that kind of sound a lot. I always had that. So even with my band in Italy, when we're playing rehearsal, and those were like the hair days, and you have these things that are, we had a band that, I don't know, it was like halfway between Bon Jovi, Bad Company, and TNT. I loved it dearly. It was like, my life mission back then. I will go back home and I was listening to the Jackson 5. Or again, James Brown has always been my thing, or Sade, whatever that means, because I like to play to those records. There was more for me to play to those records than not sometimes to the stuff that I was doing even in my own band. And I'm not talking about more to play, meaning more notes. I felt my instrument was given a little bit more of importance. Of course, then you get to jam to Iron Maiden or to Black Sabbath. Right. And of course, you get the same thing. And that's where I'm coming from. What I'm saying is I'm not like a blues guy. I'm not a blues man. Let's give Caesar what's Caesar. And I definitely am not Caesar in this case. I love that. Everything that I do in regards of blues and blues music and blues inspires is a very loving tribute to the greats. But I was not raised with that kind of cultural background. And I'm not talking about being Black. I'm talking about being involved in this, live it, breathe it, hear it on the radio, hear your older siblings, playing to it, just go to a club or whatever, and people playing this kind of music. It's never been like that. So it was an acquired taste that I love it dearly. But again, it's something that arrived later on that sense. So, but I never, it's always been part of me. So I guess, even my playing, if I listen to even some of the old stuff that I did, even on the hard rock world, it kind of I get to think that's definitely not rock or whatever it is. I don't know what I was thinking back then, but it worked, I guess. A lot of people like what I was doing. So, I get to enjoy that.
What you're saying actually strikes a common discussion topic where hard rock artists don't necessarily listen to hard rock primarily. Like Paul Stanley came up before, his passion project is Soul Station. Mm-hmm. David Lee Roth is not known to really like rock. He's known to listen primarily to funk, soul, and country. And I have a feeling that might be the case with just about every top hard rock artist. I know Phil Collin from Def Leppard has his band called Delta Deep, which is a blues band. So, Chad Smith, who you've worked with a ton, he wants to primarily work with Glenn Hughes. So what I'm getting at is, it seems like what every artist is known for primarily is not what they do for fun.
Yeah, but it's also the fun. You know what? The thing is this. I think when it comes down to this, and I'm not saying this to you, I'm just saying in general, I think public is the public at large is a little bit less open-minded than the musician himself or herself, because a lot of the musicians that I know, friends from the opposite end of the spectrum. I got guys that are like full jazz dudes that, that Miles is the Bible and that's what it is. Yeah. And then I have guys that normally will do metal on the other hand. Like you talk about it, at the end of the day, everybody likes to listen to the same thing. We're having like a long conversation, we're having the same management with some of the guys from Testament, Alex Skolnick, and we're talking about this all the time. I'm like, dude, it's just like,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's well, I guess there is a lot of probably more common legacy between metal and jazz than not with what people perceive as blues today. Even though, as musically wise, uh, the marriage between jazz and blues, it's the strongest one. I'm talking about the musician's approach in jazz and the musician's approach in metal. For me, it's like very, very, very similar. In terms of like the techniques and the dedication of the musicians and all of that, while blues, on the other hand, requires something else to begin with, and it doesn't start with the technique or the to have this incredible knowledge of your instrument and all of that, but it comes from your storytelling, just like country music on that sense. At the end of the day, blues, I think, is the most loved folk music in the world, the most famous. People don't think about blues in those terms, but the reality is blues has been around for a couple of 100 years, even though, the public, think
Alan Lomax,
but think like, Robert Johnson being the first guy playing blues. No, that was the first guy recording. That's a different story. It's a different story. So, and I'm not trying to say this to diminish the quality of the musicianship of blues guys. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is like the starting point or the main drive, the main requirement, it comes from two different positions, and I really like the blues narrative, the history, the whole, see, like in metal, for example, and I'm a huge fan of Black Sabbath, which for me is the original British blues band. I don't want to hear about anything else, because those guys were a blues band. Listen to Ozzy with the harmonic in the first early days.
Yes.
The whole thing, the whole narrative about the occult and the dark thing was just like a gimmick, like an idea of Geezer.
Yes. Totally a gimmick to surprise and shock people. Ozzy's been wearing the cross for so many years that you go, I don't think that's really what he believes, what he's singing about. And plus, Geezer Butler was writing the lyrics.
Exactly. So you get. I mean, in metal too, if you think about it, all those like those thematics, and now you got like, not now, but those bands, like especially from the Scandinavian countries, like black metal or like dark and like Merciful Fate, King Diamonds, and all those things. And I'm not saying those guys are not real. Absolutely not. I'm just saying that for a handful of people that are like really into a really knowledgeable of it, when it comes down to the blues, and I'm talking about the older folks, I'm not talking about those guys that my colleagues that you see out now that are like around the 20s or mid 20s. Right. The older dudes, they had that as a narrative culturally. Mr. Lucky, Louisiana, the voodoo. I mean, all that, it's part of it, even though there is a lot of religious and I would say Christian development within the blues. Obviously, that's what basically started the whole gospel movement. And you can tell, when you get blues guys or rhythm and blues musicians that are coming from the church background, that is just completely different. But what I'm saying is, like, I like the fact that blues brings about something that it's there. In other words, you're talking about the devil. Well, you might talk about the devil because, like Alice Cooper with the guillotine and everything like that, because that's the show that he presents and he's the king of it. But these old folks, they were talking about, the crossroad and all of that. Like, they live like it was part of them growing up. And I'm not saying that they shook hands with the devil, but that was something that was part of their narrative as much as it is, pancakes and eggs in the morning, So that's something that I really like about it, because it's dark, but in the real way. And it's a very subtle thing, but it comes out. Jimmy Page, just to give you a vibe, big blues fan. He embraced that. Exactly. I mean, he took it a little bit more to the top, but he went through the same way, because it's just like, it's part of a culture. It's part of a literature. It's not just like, okay, we dress up like space monkeys and this is going to be our gimmick, or, like Kiss, we're doing, like a Japanese theater characters, and this is what we're doing. No. This is like people for real. I mean, you get like an old blues guy. I mean, not that they met many, because the majority are dead, but, a few years ago, I was involved not only for the score, but for the music, but for the production of this documentary called Sidemen Long Road to Glory, and it's the story of Pinetop Perkins, Willie Big Eye Smith, and Hubert Sumling. These are three legends of the blues. They were born in the early 900s. These were drummer, keyboard, pianist, and guitar player for Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. So these guys had stories for ages. But people like Pinetop, this is a guy that ate McDonald's for 40 years, okay? Every day, the same thing. And he had this little Tabasco thing on it. And he had this little red horn and stuff. I mean, there was like, I don't know. It's just something that it's really fascinating for me.
I can imagine. I have one more question or topic for you, and then I'm going to ask you to plug your websites and tell us the best ways to find out about Soul Garage Experience and everything else that's going on. And that question, this could be a no, or this could actually be a 5-minute response. Okay, so you played with Steve Vai, who continues to be a friend and all that. And again, I think that in order to play with Steve Vai, you have to be an amazing musician, which you're a very, very modest person. Now, Steve Vai, of course, was the guitarist for one of my favorite singers ever, David Lee Roth. Did you ever encounter David Lee Roth on any project over the years?
No, but I have actually a funny story for you. Actually, I met the guy briefly in New York when I was still living in New York in 94, I think. It was, and it was like a weird thing because this is going to follow an advice that I will give everyone that it wants to become a musician, as a professional musician.
Okay.
With my band back then, we were like instrumental, and we had a singer too, but we were proud of our instrumental things. We're like very, I would say technical. It's kind of like very Vai, Sheehan kind of vibe. Those, post 80s. So we were playing a lot of that kind of stuff. And we were friends with, actually, one of our friends was dating Tony Bon Jovi's partner on the production company of the Power Station. And when I got to hear that David Lee Roth was working with Nile Rodgers on a record.
Oh, so this is 94, Your Filthy Little Mouth, that era. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we give him the record from our band, and it says, hey, I know David Lee is going to be recording with Nile Rodgers and everything. You don't have to do anything. You got drummer, guitar player, and bass player. We'll do all that. Just listen to it, whatever. We thought that it was cute. I mean, not that I thought that he were really anywhere. And Helen was like, oh, yes, absolutely, whatever it is. And one day I was actually went together to give her some stuff, and actually David Lee Roth was leaving, she introduced me to shook hand. That's it. That was my David Lee Roth moment. But the funny thing is that never really led to anything in regards of David Lee Roth. But a few, I would say 4 months later, Alan calls me back because Nile Rodgers was working on some other thing with Mick Jagger, and they said that if you wanted to come down and play some stuff, because they really like what you were doing and all of that. Back then I was a little bit more, I don't know, experimental on the bass, I would say. And right at that moment, I mean, actually Alan told me, well, listen, you're not going in an audition with 300 people. They like what you're doing. If you go in and you fit, then you're in. They're recording a record, they're going to be doing this kind of stuff. And I had a deal on the table from a publicist, that actually, this was the guy that brought Tommy Mottola in business. He's the guy that, it was big time at Polygon back then. And he was retired already for a few years, but he couldn't stay away from music. His son was running his publishing company. We got signed to the publishing company, Guitar Player and I, and they offer us a deal through Sony for like 3 records. Guitar Player and I were going to be producing everything. So that was it's like facing like a very, die or stay alive kind of decision, going with this. And I ended up opting for the band, for the deal, because that would have made me and Guitar Player the boss. Unfortunately, our publisher, the guy was died right in those days. So the whole thing ended up being nothing. But I realized later, and I found out later, that gig was not actually Mick Jagger, but that's where the Rolling Stones, they were auditioning bass players in New York. And a fellow folk named Daryl Jones got that gig. So what I'm trying to say is, everyone out there, if you're a musician, and I will tell you, and I say this also when I do workshop, say yes to every single opportunity it lands on your lap. Do not worry about what can happen next week. If something gets to offer to you today that it's a life-changing thing, just please consider, do yourself a favor. You wish that your problem was to be deciding going with the Rolling Stones or going with the Beatles. Just take it. Don't be difficult about it, because you might end up in regretting it.
Yeah, wow, that is a story, and it does tie to David Lee Roth. Wow. Well, what is the most people I interview? You go, what's your new project? And that's going to be the new project for the next 6 months. In your case, I'm sure there's 5 projects we can know about, and about 10 we can't, because there's an NDA or it's pending or something like that. So what are the best places that people can go online to figure out the latest and the greatest from you?
Okay, well, 2 things. My current project, which is actually, it's not really current, it's my solo project. It's Fabrizio Grossi and Soul Garage Experience. Our debut record was just released on September 10th. And for that, you can go directly to my website, fabriziogrossi.com or soulgarageexperience.com. It's double landing page. And that's a hub to get to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, leave comments. Love to hear from you. Also, Spotify, Facebook, and all the social media. You can get all the updates on everything that is happening on my personal life, meaning as a producer, as a musician, and of course, Soul Garage, what we're doing, shows, activities, and all the kind of stuff, new releases, new songs, and blah, 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 blah. And that's one. The other one is my, I would say, main band. It's Supersonic Blues Machine. It's the band that I share with Kenny Aronoff and Chris Barras and a bunch of other jolly folks that are our guests du jour that I'm coming around. And for that, I invite everyone to go visit supersonicbluesmachine.com. Same thing. You get all the info from the website, but also you have all the buttons, and it will take you anywhere that you want to go. If you want to watch a video, if you want to read something more, if you want to hear music, and that's great. I guess that's probably the easiest way.
Now I know. Well, thanks for the many years of great music, and looking forward to what's next from you, whether you're the bassist, the producer, the guy who assembled it, whatever it is. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Well, actually, next week in New York. So again, for some live shows, I'm not at liberty to announce them yet, but I've been involved with a great company from Norway. We're doing live events for people around the world. These are kind of like stream events, but we're working with some fantastic musicians. I just got back this weekend from Memphis. I cannot mention the name of the band, but people that follow me and stuff, if they read my posts, they understand what I'm talking about. And same thing next week in New York. So, and I'm happy because I'm coming back to a city that I love dearly. So maybe we'll look up and you get to hear some more music.
I will do some research on that, and we'll take it from there, Mr. Grossi. Thank you for your time, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for having me. Bye, everybody. Be kind to each other.
Paltrocast.